also really, maybe the one thing I hope you hear me say this evening, and it comes very genuinely from myself, from the almost 60,000 folks who are members of our organization, and I know from a lot of the conservative movement leaders around the state. Thank you all so very, very much for giving us Erwin Cain. And we have a lot of high hopes for November, but more importantly, for January on through. That y'all have really put forward a candidate who is going to be doing the right things going into the fall, but again, more importantly, doing the right things going into the legislative session. But I would offer you one, maybe, I don't know if this is discouraging or not, but one piece of advice, hopefully it's not overly discouraging advice, which is this. Erwin Cain will absolutely fail. He will absolutely be corrupted by the forces in Austin that exist to push against conservatives, to tear them down, to make them betray their principles, betray everything they've campaigned on. He will absolutely fail if you guys pat him on the head on the first Wednesday in November after he wins, pat him on the head, send him to Austin, and ignore him for the next 2 years. Because the other team on the first Wednesday in November are going to be after him like stink on a skunk. I mean, it is going to be horrible what he is going to go through from the pressure that comes from the other team day in and day out, the pressure on his family as he's spending all this time in Austin and his family's here. The pressure is overwhelming. Too often we as conservatives abandon our team when they get elected office, and then we wonder why they stray. They stray because we fail to provide them what they desperately need, and that's the accountability of their bosses. We tend to forget that in our system of government, we don't have leaders. We don't have people in charge. The United States is the only country in the world that has servants running the machinations of our government. There are servants. And when you ignore your servant, they tend to screw things up. And that is where we are today, because too many of us have ignored our servants. And we wonder why they go off half-cocked and wild cockamamie directions. It is because we have not given them proper accountability, proper guidance. We haven't stood with them and around them day in and day out during the deliberative processes of the legislative process. So please, please, please don't just elect him, stand with him as Mr. Cain goes to serve you in the Texas legislature. Now, you guys have also served in a lot of ways and are serving in a lot of ways as kind of the epicenter for some really exciting things going on around the state of Texas in the conservative movement. Certainly, Mr. Cain's victory in the March primary was very exciting. The trend lines that we're seeing here are incredibly exciting. An entrenched incumbent is going to be taken down by Erwin Cain. That's very exciting to see. But I will tell you that a lot of us looking over the past several years, a lot of our measurement was if you can find the right person to run against Mark Homer and someone who has a credible chance of solid, lasting victory there, it's going to happen and encourage people around the state. And I can't tell you the number of candidates who I spoke to going into the March primary who saw the kind of work that Mr. Cain was doing and said, wow, if that guy is willing to do all that work in that district against Mark Homer, why am I not doing more? So he inspired a lot of folks that I'm not sure he's met all of these fellows yet and ladies yet, but he has really done that. So again, thank you all for doing that. But y'all aren't alone in living in a district in the state, in a part of the state where there is this exciting new, I don't even want to call it resurgence, because it's not that, it's a revolution for conservatives going on, where people are standing up and saying, we've had enough, we've had our fill. We've reached that point where if you've been out in the morning before dawn and it's pitch black and you kind of fumbling around and then you look up and suddenly realize it's daylight. That's where in a lot of ways so many people are, where we have been fumbling around and suddenly have realized, wow, the world is a completely different place. Let's change it. It's not the world that we thought it was, whether it's from the nonsense being pushed down by Barack Obama and his merry band of thieves, whether it's the buildup of the problems with our state budget and other things, people have recognized it's time for us to make substantive changes in the way that we approach government. And that's very exciting. The energy at the Republican convention now a week and a half ago was palpable. The number of people who were just so excited about the opportunities to change things for the substantive better was just overwhelming. I hadn't felt that kind of energy at any political convention in a very long time. People were excited to be there and about the opportunities for the very difficult work ahead. Now, when we look at these elections around them, kind of what they're telling us, what the elections around the state, from the March primary through these now couple of special elections that we've had, and then leading into the trend lines for the general election, our conservatives are going to do really well. And I don't mean Republicans. Republicans, political parties do weird things over time. The Republican Party of the early 20th century was the party of high taxes, high tariffs, high barriers on trade. They were the party that promoted big business and pushed down small business. That was the Republican Party of the early 20th century, while the Democratic Party of the early 20th century was the party of low taxes, of small government, decentralized government. Parties change over time. A majority of the Republican appointees to the Supreme Court in 1973 gave us the Roe v. Wade decision, while a majority of Democratic appointees to the U.S. Supreme Court were pro-life. So political parties change. I'm pretty certain that none of us really wake up in the morning and think elephant or donkey. We're motivated by principles. We're motivated by ideas. We're motivated by that idea of liberty. Frederick Bastiat, one of my favorite writers, he was the last good thing to come out of France. He died in 1854. He wrote a great book called The Law. And I highly encourage you to track this book down, The Law. It's 150 pages long. You can read it in an afternoon. Easily written. And he goes and talks about what is the rule of law. How does government and law and liberty all intersect? What does all this thing mean? And he writes one of my favorite lines in the book, and indeed in all of economic literature. He writes, "What is this thing called liberty that makes the heart beat faster?" I love the way that sounds. He goes on to describe exactly what liberty is. Again, the book is called The Law. Highly encourage you to grab that book. You can download it from Google or those kind of places. But we find so many people who are excited. We find people who are motivated by these principles, who are motivated by liberty. You saw it coming out of the primary, where we saw the wishy-washy, we call them moderates. I'm not really sure. I don't know what a moderate is. I've never really truly met one. Certainly rhinos is probably a pretty good description of who these people were, who were felled in the primary elections, both incumbents who lost. Almost more importantly than incumbents who lost were the incumbents who had never been challenged and thought that they were perfectly safe and who found themselves barely winning elections. That gets everyone's notice when they have to spend a lot of money to barely keep a seat that they thought belonged to them. And then we saw it in the open races, where you had candidates who didn't have the power of incumbency, and the conservative consistently won in each and every one of those races.